She came to my door on a Tuesday morning, two men standing behind her like a wall. She did not sit. She did not accept the chair I offered. She looked at my face and said, "You have 48 hours to disappear, or I release everything, every photograph, every phone call, and trust me, it destroys you, not him." I did not scream. I did not slam the door. I stood in my white robe in my own hallway, and I looked at her the way you look at something you have been afraid of for 3 years and have finally stopped being afraid of. I said, "Come in." She walked into my apartment like she had built it herself. Before I tell you what she placed on my kitchen table, before I tell you what I said when she left, and what I did in the 48 hours that followed, and why the thing she expected to destroy me became the thing that set me free, I need you to understand what 3 years of being someone's most carefully hidden secret actually costs. Not the glamour version, the real version. The version that lives inside your chest at midnight, when the phone has not yet rung, and you are lying in the dark, wondering whether tonight is one of the nights he calls, or one of the nights he doesn't, and you cannot sleep either. Way, that is the version I am going to tell you. My name is something the whole world knows, and almost nobody says correctly. They say it like a sound effect, like a category. She is a Marilyn, as if I invented a type of woman rather than simply existing as one. I have been performing that category since I was 22 years old, and I have gotten very good at the performance, and I have never fully made peace with what the performance cost me underneath. I was 34 years old when I met him. I want to tell you about the night we met before I tell you anything else, because everything that came after the calls, the photographs, the woman at my door on that Tuesday morning, everything started in one room, at one party, with one conversation that lasted 40 minutes and changed the architecture of the next 3 years of my life. The party was the kind of party that only exists at a certain level of power, the level where the rooms are large and the guest lists are short, and everyone present understands that their presence is itself a statement. I had been to parties like this before. I knew how to move through them the way you learn to move through anything that is both necessary and dangerous with attention, with the specific grace of someone who has studied the terrain. He was across the room. I knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. That is not what I mean. I saw him before I was supposed to, before the introduction, before the managed proximity, before the social machinery arranged the moment. I saw him standing near a window talking to 2 men and not listening to either of them. His eyes were moving across the room the way the eyes of someone who is always looking for the thing the room does not know it contains. His eyes found mine. He did not look away. That was the first thing. The most powerful man in the world looked directly at me across a crowded room and did not look away, and did not look embarrassed about looking. I looked away first. That was the second thing. Before I tell you what he said, when he finally crossed the room to where I was standing, before I tell you about the note that arrived at my apartment 3 days later, and what I did when I read it, I need to tell you that I understood from that first moment exactly what kind of impossible thing I was walking toward. I was 34 years old, and I had been walking toward impossible things my entire adult life, and I had learned to recognize them, and I walked toward them anyway. That is the honest version. 40 minutes. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, and I remember almost every sentence of it, and I will not reproduce them here because they belong to me and not to the story. What I will tell you is that he spoke to me the way no one in my professional life had ever spoken to me, not to the category, not to the symbol, not to the spectacle. He spoke to the person. He asked questions that required actual answers. He listened to the actual answers. I want to tell you about one specific moment inside those 40 minutes, because it is the moment I have returned to more than any other in the years since. He had asked me something about the work, not a polite question, not the performance of curiosity that people in his world deployed at events like this one to demonstrate their range of interests. An actual question. Something specific, something that demonstrated he had paid attention to things about my work that most people did not pay attention to. I answered it. Then I asked him a question in return, something equally specific, something that pushed past the public version of his position into the actual opinion of the man. He was surprised. I saw it on his face, a brief fracture in the practiced composure. The slight shift of someone who has not been asked a real question in a long time and has momentarily forgotten that real questions are possible. Then he answered it. Directly. Without the diplomatic softening. Without the language that could be quoted without consequence. He told me what he actually thought. I said, "That's the true answer." He said, "Is it obvious that it's the true answer?" I said, "Only to someone who knows the difference." He looked at me for a moment. Then, "You know the difference," I said. "I've had to learn it the hard way." He said, "So have I." That was the moment, that specific exchange. Two people recognizing each other across a room full of people performing their public selves. Two people who had both spent years learning the difference between the performed version and the true one, and had arrived, unexpectedly, at a party where the other person knew the difference too. At the end of 40 minutes, he said, "I would like to continue this." I said, "That's not possible." He said, "I know. I'd like to continue it anyway." I said nothing. He read my silence correctly. He called 3 days later. Not immediately, which I noticed. He waited 3 days, which was long enough that I had almost convinced myself he wouldn't call, which was almost certainly exactly the calculation he intended. I had answered the door of my hope once, and stepped back from it, and the 3 days had allowed me to almost close it, and then the phone rang, and I understood that the 3 days had been deliberate, had been the specific product of a man who understood human psychology well enough to know that calling immediately would be too easy, and not calling at all would give me an exit, and calling in 3 days, when I had begun to lower my guard, was the exact right moment. I answered anyway, knowing all of that, knowing that the 3-day calculation was itself a form of the same intelligence that had asked real questions at the party. I answered because the thing on the other side of the door was still the same thing. It had been 40 minutes into a conversation at a party, and it was not a thing I was ready to refuse. He said, "I've been thinking about our conversation." I said, "So have I." He said, "I don't know how to stop." I said, "You should stop." He said, "I know." A pause. Long enough that I thought perhaps the call was over. Then, he said, "I can't." We stayed on the phone for an hour and a half. That night, the first night. By the time we stopped talking, it was past 2 in the morning, and I was lying in the dark with the phone pressed to my ear, and the city doing what the city does at 2 in the morning outside my window, and I thought, this is how it begins. This is exactly how it begins. The calls became the shape of my nights. Not every night, that would have been too much, too visible, too many points of vulnerability in the machinery he needed to maintain. But often enough that I started arranging my evenings around the possibility of them. I would take the pills the doctor gave me and lie in the dark and wait. Sometimes the phone rang, sometimes it didn't. Both felt like him. I want to tell you what those calls were. Specifically, because the word affair flattens them into something simple, and they were not simple. They were the most honest conversations I had during 3 years of my life. He spoke to me about things a man in his position was not supposed to say out loud: the cost of the visibility, the specific loneliness of belonging to something too large to belong to you back, the decisions that kept him awake, the gap between the man the country needed him to be and the man he actually was when no camera was present. I said, "I know that gap. I live in it." He said, "I know you do. That's why I'm talking to you." I said, "Is that the only reason?" He said, "No." He said it the way he said the true things directly, without softening, the way a person speaks when they have decided that the softened version costs more than the direct one. I want to stop here and tell you something that I have never said in any version of any story anyone has told about my life, because most versions of this story are told by people who were not inside it, and therefore do not know what the inside felt like. The inside felt like relief. Every time the phone rang and I knew it was him, there was relief. Not excitement, I want to be precise, not the giddy electricity of something forbidden, not the melodramatic thrill that people imagine when they imagine two people conducting an impossible love at the highest levels of power and fame. Relief. The specific relief of a person who has been performing for the entire rest of the world all day and has finally, at whatever hour the call came, one place where the performance is not required. He did not need the performance from me. He did not need the category. He did not need the Marilyn. He had encountered the Marilyn, everyone encountered the Marilyn eventually, and had moved past it in that first 40 minutes at that party, and was talking consistently to whatever was underneath. I cannot overstate how rare that was. I had been a symbol since I was 22 years old. I had been performing the symbol so long that the line between the performance and the person had become, in some lights, difficult to locate. There were people in my life who genuinely cared for me and who could not fully see me through the symbol because the symbol was too bright, too large, too insistently between us. There were professionals who needed the symbol for their work. There were men who wanted the symbol. There were very few people, in 12 years of being one of the most recognized faces on earth, who sat down across from me and required nothing from the symbol at all. He was one of them. That was what the calls were. That was what I kept showing up for. Year after year, call after call, the late nights, and the waiting, and the cost of being half inside something that could never be fully inside anything. Before I tell you what he said the first time he used that line, the line that became the shape of those 3 years, I need to tell you about the month before he first said it. Because the month before explains why it landed the way it landed. The month before was the month I understood that I had made a fundamental error in the accounting of what we were. I had been calculating it as equal. Two people in an impossible situation, both choosing it, both paying the same cost. That is a comfortable calculation. It is also, I learned in the month before he first said the line, completely wrong. The cost was not equal. It was never going to be equal. I understood this when I arrived at an event. A large event, hundreds of people, cameras everywhere, and I saw the way the room organized itself around him and around his wife beside him. The way the photographs were arranged, the way the story was arranged, the way the whole architecture of the public world was built specifically to accommodate his life and specifically not to accommodate mine in relation to his. I drove home that night and sat in the dark for a long time and thought about the arithmetic. Then the phone rang. He said, "I've been thinking about you all evening." I said, "I've been thinking about the same things." He said, "You were there tonight." I said, "Yes." He said, "I wanted to come to where you were standing, and I couldn't." I said, "I know." A silence. Then he said, "I can't divorce her." I said, "I know." He said, "You are the only sin this country forgives me." I lay in my bed in the dark with the phone pressed to my ear, and I thought about that sentence for a long time, about whether it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me, or the cruelest, or both, about what it meant to be named a sin, about what it meant to be told the sin was forgiven, about whether forgiveness extended to the sin itself or only to the person committing it. I said, "I know that too." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be." I said, "I'm not sorry either, not yet." He said that sentence, the whole sentence, "I can't divorce her, you are the only sin this country forgives me," approximately 24 more times over the following 3 years. Sometimes it was an answer to something I had said. Sometimes it arrived unprompted, as if he had been carrying it all day and needed to put it down somewhere. I came to understand it as the most complete true thing he could tell me, not a justification, not a reassurance, but an accounting. The full accounting of what we were, and what we were not, and what we were not going to become. I kept picking up the phone, every time, for 3 years. Before I tell you about the Tuesday morning, and the woman and the men standing behind her, before I tell you about the folder she placed on my kitchen table, and what was inside it, I need to tell you about the year the film was falling apart. Because what happened that year is what made the Tuesday morning possible. It is what put the photographs in the folder. And it is what I did not understand until I was standing in my hallway looking at a woman who had just told me I had 48 hours. The film was a disaster from the start. Not artistically, I am not talking about the art. The art was the one part I believed in completely. The production was the disaster. The studio wanted one thing. The director wanted another. The press wanted a spectacle. Everyone wanted the category. Everyone wanted the Marilyn, the symbol, the familiar performance. Nobody wanted what I was actually trying to do inside those takes, which was find something true. I want to tell you what it was like to be on a film set during that period. Not the public version, the version where the difficult actress keeps making the production late, and the studio sends memos, and the director loses his patience, and the newspapers get hold of the memos and publish them, and everyone has an opinion about the difficult actress. The inside version. The inside version was, I was 35 years old, and I was standing in front of cameras that had been aimed at my face since I was in my early 20s, and I knew, with the complete certainty of someone who has spent years studying the difference between what a camera captures and what is actually true, that what was being captured was not true. It was good. It was technically accomplished. It had all the surface properties of the thing it was supposed to be. It did not have the thing underneath. I kept trying to find the thing underneath. This made everyone furious. The director required 20 takes because I kept starting over. Not because I forgot lines. I knew the lines. I had known the lines since the second week of rehearsal. I kept starting over because on take 3 and take 7 and take 12 and take 19, I could feel the performance happening, and I could not stop myself from watching the performance happening, and the watching produced exactly wrong quality in the face and the body, and every person in the room could see that the quality was wrong, even though most of them could not have explained what made it wrong. On take 20, I stopped watching myself and said the line, and it was right. We moved on. I was 3 hours behind schedule. The studio sent a memo. I sent the memo back with a note at the bottom. The note said, "There will be more of these. There were more of these." My hands shook some mornings. I arrived on wrong days and failed to appear on right ones. The doctor came and gave me things, and I took the things, and some of them helped and some of them didn't, and I could not always tell the difference in advance. He called more during that period. I noticed that. He called more during that period. I noticed that. I wondered sometimes whether he knew through the machinery available to a man in his position that I was struggling, whether someone had told him, whether he felt it in the space of my voice and moved into the space the way he always moved into the spaces I left. He said once, "You should finish the film." I said, "I know." He said, "Not for them. For yourself." I said, "Where would I rest when it was finished?" He said nothing for a long time. Then, "I wish I could tell you somewhere specific." I said, "I know you can't." He said, "I know you know." That is the thing about what we were, that I could never explain to anyone who was not inside it. The knowing. The specific mutual knowledge of two people who understand the limits of their situation with complete clarity and remain inside it anyway. There is a kind of intimacy in that knowing that I have not found anywhere else. It is not a comfortable intimacy. It is not a safe one. But it is real in a way that comfortable and safe things sometimes are not. I finished the film. I rested badly, in my apartment with the white walls and the telephone, and the pills that helped with sleep, and the ones that helped with the day, and the doctor who came when I called him. I was not well during that period. I was honest with myself about not being well in a way that I had not always been honest with myself, which was its own kind of progress. And then it was spring. The party I told you about. His eyes across the room, not looking away. His wife beside him, the 48 hours of driving home, and lying in the dark, waiting for the phone. He called. He said, "You were there tonight." I said, "Yes." He said, "I saw you across the room, and I thought, there is the one person in this world who knows what I actually am and chooses me anyway." I said, "That's a heavy thing to carry." He said, "I know. You carry it better than anyone I've known." I said, "That's because you've never seen me not carrying it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to see you." We arranged it the way we always arranged it, carefully, through the people whose job it was to make impossible things possible and ensure they left no trace. A specific date, a specific location. The protocol, the checked rooms, the replaced staff, the windows covered. I arrived in the car that had been sent. I walked through the door that had been arranged. I was in the room. He was already there. I want to tell you about being in the room with him, because it was the thing I could never explain to anyone who asked. The room was the opposite of everything else in my life. In every other room I was the event, the thing everyone was looking at, the spectacle, the symbol. In the room with him, he was the event, and for the length of our time in that room I was simply a person, not a category, a person. That was worth more to me than I can easily put into language. 20 years of being a symbol, the specific exhaustion of that, and then a room where I did not have to be anything other than whoever I was without the performance. He asked me once, in one of those rooms, "What are you actually afraid of? Not the version you tell people, the actual version." I said, "I'm afraid I don't exist outside the performance." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I understand that fear completely." I said, "Do you?" He said, "Everything I do is witnessed by 100 people. Very few of them see what they're witnessing. That is its own kind of disappearing." I looked at him across the room and thought, we are both of us doing the same impossible thing. Existing inside a version of ourselves the world has decided we are, trying to maintain something underneath it that belongs only to us. Before I tell you what was in the folder, before I tell you what I said to the woman after she laid it on my table, and what I did in the 48 hours that changed everything I need to tell you about the morning of the Tuesday, the specific quality of that morning, because the specific quality of it is the thing I have thought about more than anything else. I had slept. Actually slept the real kind, the kind that arrives without negotiation, without pills, without the hour of lying in the dark counting reasons the night will eventually end. I woke at 9, and the light in the apartment was amber, the specific amber of a morning that has not yet decided what it will become. I made coffee. I was wearing a white robe. My hair was not arranged. The face was not built yet, just my face, the original, the one that existed before the ritual construction each morning turned it into the thing the world recognized. I was standing at my kitchen counter with the coffee when the bell rang. I did not think anything of it. I opened the door. She was standing on my doorstep, 2 men behind her, both wearing the kind of suit that is not expensive but is correct, government correct, institution correct, the suit of people who are not important themselves, but stand adjacent to great importance and have been trained to look like its extension. She was smaller than I had built her in my mind. I had been building her for 3 years in the spaces of the phone calls, in the parties where I watched her stand beside him, in the private hours of a life organized around someone she was always more formally attached to than I was. I had made her large the way you make the thing you cannot name into something enormous. She was simply a woman, in a dark coat in the morning, with eyes that had gone past something a long time ago and arrived at something harder. She looked at me. She did not say good morning. She did not say hello. She looked at my face and she said, "You have 48 hours to disappear, or I release everything, every photograph, every phone call. And trust me, it destroys you, not him." I need to stop here and tell you what happened inside me in the 2 seconds between hearing those words and speaking. In those 2 seconds, I understood something I had been half understanding for 3 years. I understood that she was right. Not about the 48 hours. I had no intention of accepting the 48 hours the way she intended them, but about the asymmetry. About the structure of what would happen if the folder went to the newspapers. She had named it precisely, and she was correct. The photographs would be photographs of a famous actress and a married president. The story that would be told would be about the actress. The president would be part of it, but he would survive it. The architecture of his world was built for survival in ways mine was not. I would not survive it in the same way. She knew this. She had calculated it. She had held the photographs and the phone records for however long she had held them, and she had calculated this fact carefully, and she was now presenting it to me with the specific confidence of a person who has done the arithmetic and is certain of the result. She was right about the arithmetic. In those 2 seconds, I ran the same arithmetic and reached the same conclusion and made a decision. I said, "Come in." I don't know why I said it, or I do know because showing her that her arrival had fractured me was the one thing I was not willing to do, and inviting her in was the inverse of fracturing, the opposite of what the 48 hours was designed to produce. I invited her in because I had learned, in 3 years of navigating impossible situations with limited power, that the person who defines the room controls the room, and I was going to define this one. She came in. She sat at my kitchen table. She did not wait to be invited to sit either. She pulled the chair out and sat with the particular efficiency of a woman who has been executing plans for long enough that every movement is purposeful. She placed a folder on the table. She said, "I want you to look at this before I say anything else." I sat across from her. I opened the folder. "I need to tell you what I felt before I tell you what I saw." Because the feeling arrived first, a cold, spreading understanding, the specific sensation of a thing you have been half knowing for a long time becoming fully known all at once, rushing in from every angle simultaneously. Inside the folder, my phone records, months of them, printed on paper with certain numbers circled in ink, numbers I recognized, dates, times. The architecture of 3 years of late-night calls reduced to a column of data that was accurate and complete, and utterly devastating in its completeness. My home address, on a card, in a handwriting I did not recognize, which meant it belonged to someone I had never met, which meant the reaching into my life had happened through channels deeper than any I had imagined. The photographs were taken in rooms I had believed were safe, rooms that had been checked, rooms with covered windows and replaced staff, and the full protocol of someone who understood surveillance and counted it. The photographs existed anyway. They showed us together. They showed enough. They showed far more than enough. He was recognizable. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Then I looked up. She was watching me. Not with satisfaction I had expected satisfaction. The particular satisfaction of a woman who has held something this long and is finally using it. What I saw was not satisfaction. It was something older and more complicated. The expression of a person who arrived at a conclusion they did not want to arrive at and is executing it anyway, from the far side of what it cost them to get there. I said, "How long have you known?" She said, "Long enough." I said, "What do you want?" She said, "I already told you. 48 hours. I said, "And if I don't?" She said, "Then in 49 hours your phone records are with every publication that has ever printed your name. Your photographs are with the same publications. Every private moment you believed was private becomes a photograph in a newspaper. And the story that gets told is the story of a woman who spent 3 years pursuing a married man, not the story of a man who spent 3 years calling her at 2 in the morning." She said it quietly, without heat, the way someone states facts that have been checked and confirmed and require no embellishment. I said, "You've thought about this carefully," she said. "I've had time to think." I said, "How much time?" She said, "More than you know." I looked at her across my kitchen table. The coffee had gone cold on the counter. The amber morning light had shifted toward white. Outside the windows, the city was doing what the city does at 9 in the morning, ordinary and completely unaware of what was happening in this room. I thought about the line, "I can't divorce her. You are the only sin this country forgives me." 24 iterations of that sentence across 3 years. I thought about what it meant that she was here, that the line had always contained a knowledge neither of us had spoken directly, that the geometry of what we were had included her awareness at some point I had not been told about, that the 3 rooms of this situation, his, mine, hers, had never been as separate as I had believed. I said, "Does he know you're here?" She said, "This is not about him. This is about you and me." I said, "Everything is about him." She said, "Not this. This is between 2 women. He is not a part of this conversation." I looked at her for a long time. I thought about that, about the specific framing of it. Not his wife comes to warn off his lover, but 2 women in a kitchen discussing something that a man has made necessary. The framing was accurate and also, I thought, deliberate. She was telling me something about how she had organized this inside herself. Not jealousy, not vengeance, a decision, a conclusion executed. I said, "What do you actually want?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want you to understand clearly what the next 48 hours offer you and what they withdraw after that." She gathered the folder. She stood. She straightened her coat. At the door she stopped. She said, "I am not here because I am jealous. I have been past jealous for a long time. I am here because I am finished. There is a difference." She left. The two men left with her. The door closed. I stood in my kitchen, in my white robe in the amber light that had become white light with the cold coffee and the echo of what she had said, and the 48 hours sitting in the room with me like a weather system that had moved in and had not yet decided whether it was going to clear. I did not call him. That is the first thing. The first decision I made was to not call him, not immediately. The reflex was there. Of course the reflex was there. 3 years of reaching for the phone when things became difficult. 3 years of his voice being the thing that moved the walls back. But I sat with the reflex without acting on it. I wanted to know what I thought before I knew what he would say. I wanted my own version of the next 48 hours before I allowed his version to enter them. I made coffee instead, fresh coffee. The first pot had gone cold during her visit. I stood at the counter and made coffee with the careful attention I gave to ordinary things when I needed ordinary things to be real: the water, the grounds, the specific sound of it beginning, the smell. I was in my own kitchen, in my own apartment, in my own life. That sounds simple. It was not simple. The woman had come into my kitchen, and the folder was still on the table, and the photographs were inside the folder, and the 48 hours were in the room, and I needed to be in my own kitchen making coffee rather than anywhere else. I drank the coffee. I looked at the folder on the table. I thought about the first time I had understood what kind of situation I was actually in. Not the surface version, the romantic version, two people who cannot help what they feel, the structural version. The version where I was a woman with no institutional protection, in a situation organized entirely around protecting something else. I had understood it at the party where she stood beside him. I had looked at the room and seen the architecture of it, who was protected, and how and by what mechanisms, and I had understood that I existed completely outside the architecture. Not as a person who had been overlooked, as a person who had been deliberately located outside it. The architecture required my location outside it. If I had been inside it, acknowledged, named, part of the public story, the architecture would collapse. My location outside was structural. It was the price of the whole thing existing. I had understood this. I had accepted it. I had kept picking up the phone anyway. Now the architecture was informing me, through the folder on my kitchen table, of the full cost of my location. I sat with this for a long time. I called my doctor instead. The doctor arrived within an hour. He was a small man with careful hands, and the particular quality of listening that does not require the listener to arrange their face into expressions, communicating the listening. He simply listened. I had paid for that quality for years, and considered it worth every cent. I showed him the folder. He looked at everything without touching it. Then he looked at me. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm thinking." He said, "You should not be alone today." I said, "I'm used to being alone." He said, "That is not the same thing as this being a good time for it." He was right. He left me things, the usual things, the appointments and the prescriptions and the clinical warmth of a man who understood what his patient needed and provided it without drama. And then I was alone in my apartment with the 48 hours and the folder on the table and the full weight of the decision sitting across from me in the chair where she had been sitting. I thought about him, about the calls, about 3 years of the truest conversations I had had with anyone. I thought about, I can't divorce her, and the specific honesty of that, the way he had never pretended, never told me it would become something different, never offered a future he could not deliver. He had told me exactly what it was. I had accepted exactly what it was. The accepting was mine. I thought about the photographs, about the rooms that had been checked and had not been safe, about what it meant that everything I had believed was private had been, at every point, observed by people whose only job was to observe it, and document it, and keep the documentation somewhere that could be retrieved when it became useful. I thought about what she had said at the door. I am not here because I am jealous. I have been past jealous for a long time. I am here because I am finished. And I thought, so am I. That was the thought that arrived in the first hour, without being looked for, and without being resisted. So am I. Not as surrender, not as the thing the 48 hours was designed to produce. As something that had been true for longer than I had allowed myself to say it. The exhaustion of the hidden architecture, the cost of 3 years inside a thing that could not be named. The specific quality of a love that is most honest in the dark and most impossible in the light. So am I. I called him at 11 that night. He answered on the second ring. He said, I know. I said, how long have you known she was going to do this? He said, I found out this afternoon. I said, before or after she came to my door? He said, I'm not certain of the exact timing. Which meant before. I heard the not certainty as what it was, the careful language of a man who has spent his life learning to say things that are technically not untrue. I said, I see. He said, I want you to know I would have told you. I said, when? He said, when I knew how. I said, there is no how. There is just the thing, and then you say the thing. Silence. Then, I know. I said, who took the photographs? He said, people whose job is to document everything in proximity to certain interests. I said, were those interests yours? He said, not those photographs. No. I said, but you knew they would be taken. He was quiet for a moment, a real quiet, not the managed quiet of a man finding language, the quiet of a man who has looked at something directly and is not going to pretend he hasn't. He said, I knew there was no room that was truly private. I said, you could have told me that. He said, yes, I could have. I said, why didn't you? He said, because telling you would have meant making a choice I was not ready to make. I said, between me and the machinery. He said, between wanting you to be safe and wanting you to be mine, they required different things. I sat with that, the wanting you to be mine. I had heard many things from him across 3 years, the line, the apologies, the honest things he said in the dark. I had not heard that sentence before, and I understood from the quality of it that it was the truest thing he had said to me, and also, simultaneously, the sentence that confirmed everything I needed to confirm. I said, I've made my decision. He said, I know what it is. I said, then you know I'm not asking for anything. He said, I know. I said, I want you to know something before we stop talking like this. He said, what? I said, I do not regret any of it. Not one call, not one room, not one night in the dark waiting for the phone to ring. I knew what it was when I chose it, and it was what I chose, and I would choose it again. I want you to know that. He was quiet for a long time. Then, so would I. I said, good. He said, I am sorry it cost you this. I said, everything costs something. You taught me that actually. He said, did I? I said, you said once that nothing worth having was without cost. You said the question was whether what you were paying for was worth the cost. I thought about it for a long time afterward. He said, what did you conclude? I said, that it was worth it. That it is still worth it. He said, yes. We stayed on the phone for another hour, not talking about the folder or the photographs or the 48 hours, talking the way we had always talked in the best versions of the calls, sideways, specific, the way two people talk who know each other's minds well enough that they don't need the scaffolding of conventional conversation. He told me something he was afraid of that he had not said to anyone else. I told him something true about the work, what I had wanted from it, and what I had gotten, and the gap between those two things, and why the gap did not mean the wanting had been wrong. It was past 2 a.m. He said, I have to go. I said, I know. He said, I will call. I said, I know. He said my name, the real one, not the category name, the name I had before I built the symbol. He said it the way he said it when he meant it carefully, with the specific weight of a person holding something they understand is fragile. I said, "Good night." He said, "Good night." I put the receiver down. The apartment was quiet. The city was doing what it does after 2 in the morning, slower, more itself, less performed. I sat in the dark for a while and felt the shape of what the night had contained, and then I got up and I did the thing I had decided I was going to do. I wrote a letter. Not to him. That letter exists, and it is mine, and I will not reproduce it here. A different letter. A letter to myself. To the person I had been 3 years before, at a party, watching a man across a room not look away. I wrote what I would tell her, if I could. Not "don't do it," that is not what I would tell her. I would tell her, "You will know exactly what you are choosing when you choose it. Choose it anyway. Choose it with the eyes that see it clearly. And, when the woman comes to your door, on the Tuesday morning, you will not have to pretend that you didn't know. You will have known all along, and the knowing will be the thing that lets you survive it with yourself intact." I wrote the letter. I kept it. In the 48 hours, I did what I had decided to do. I made arrangements. Not the arrangements she was requesting, not the disappearing, not the erasing, not the reconstruction of my life around her timetable. Different arrangements. The arrangements of a woman who understands that she is walking away from something on her own terms, rather than being removed from it on someone else's. There is a difference between those two things. It is everything. I did not destroy the photographs. People always expect one of two choices in a situation like this: destroy or surrender. I kept them. I put them somewhere safe, in my own keeping, in a place that belongs to me. Not as a weapon. I had no interest in weapons. As evidence that something real had existed. Evidence against the version of the story that would be told without me. The version where a woman had been a footnote, a distraction, a manageable situation, a folder delivered on a Tuesday morning, and dealt with in 48 hours. I was not a footnote. I had been a person who loved a person, and who had been loved in return in the ways that were available. The photographs were proof that those rooms had existed. The rooms where I was not a symbol. The rooms where the most powerful man in the world was simply a man, uncertain and honest and afraid of some of the same things I was afraid of. I kept the proof. The 48 hours ended. She had given me a deadline and I had used it, but not the way she had intended for it to be used. I had used it to end something on my own terms, to write the letter to myself, to arrange what was mine to arrange, to make the phone call that was the last real one, and to say what I needed to say in it without asking for anything I was not going to receive. I was not going to be made into the story of a woman who was destroyed. That was the 48 hours offer, to be destroyed on her timetable before she could destroy me on hers. I refused it. I accepted the ending, but refused the terms of the destruction. I did not disappear. That is what she had asked for. I walked away, which is a different thing entirely, and I walked away in a direction of my own choosing. The calls stopped. That was the shape of the walking away, not a formal ending with speeches and conclusions, but the gradual reduction until they were not happening anymore. I was not waiting for them anymore. The insomnia had other causes. The pills the doctor gave me were for different things. The nights had a different texture. There is a particular grief in losing something you chose, and would choose again. People think grief only comes from loss that was not chosen from things taken from you. That is not true. You can grieve a door you closed yourself. You can grieve a fire you let go out because you understood that keeping it burning was going to burn the house. The grief is real. It has its own weight, and its own hours, and its own specific way of arriving, without warning when you are doing something ordinary, a particular quality of late-night light. The telephone ringing for some unrelated reason at 2 in the morning, a song that played during one of the calls. I grieved. I did not regret. Those are two different things. I need to say that clearly, because people expect them to be the same thing, and they are not. I grieved the calls. I grieved the rooms. I grieved the specific quality of being known that I had not had before, and have not had since in quite the same way. I did not regret choosing it, not for 1 hour of the months that followed. I had walked in with open eyes and I had paid the cost, and the accounting, when I looked at it honestly, remained in my favor. In the months after, I worked. I wore the silk and the sequins and the constructed face, and I performed the symbol with the practiced ease of 20 years of practice. I was good at it. It was not the thing I had been most alive inside, but it was mine, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. I thought about her sometimes, the woman in the dark coat, what she had said at the door. I am not here because I am jealous. I have been past jealous for a long time. I am here because I am finished. I understood that, more, as the months passed, than I had in the moment. She had been in an impossible situation longer than I had been, and it had cost her things that were not the same things it had cost me, but were real costs nonetheless. I did not think of her as an enemy. I thought of her as another person inside something larger than either of us. He did call once more, 3 months later. It was early evening. He said, "I think about you." I said, "I think about you too." He said, "I hope you know what it was." I said, "I know what it was." He said, "I'm glad it was real." I said, "So am I." He said, "Take care of yourself." I said, "I will, you too." I meant it, he meant it. We were two people who had given each other something real in the only conditions available to us, and who were now on the other side of it, carrying it the way you carry real things, not lightly, not without cost, but with the particular dignity of someone who chose what they chose and is not ashamed of the choosing. I put the phone down for the last time. I went to the window. The street below was doing what streets do in the early evening, people moving with purpose, the city in the part of the day where it is most itself. Ordinary life proceeding in the way ordinary life proceeds, without knowing or needing to know what is happening in the rooms above it. I thought, I was real in those rooms. I was the most real version of myself in those rooms. Whatever the rest of it cost, whatever the 48 hours cost, whatever the photographs and the phone records and the woman in the dark coat at my door cost, I was real. In the one context where I had spent my life struggling to be real. That is not nothing. I turned away from the window. I went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked at the telephone on the nightstand, and I thought about everything the telephone had held for 3 years, every call, every night, every version of "I can't divorce her. You are the only sin this country forgives me." I thought about what it had meant to be called a sin. I thought about what it had meant to be forgiven. And I thought, I do not need forgiveness. I made choices. I made them with open eyes, and I paid their costs. And I will not reduce them to the category of sin, because the country required its symbols to be simple. I am not simple. I never was. The telephone sat on the nightstand. It did not ring. I did not expect it to. The nights had a new shape now, not the half-sleep of waiting, not the specific tension of a person listening for a phone. Just the night, my night, the specific texture of a life that belonged to me, all of it, including the 3 years that had happened, and the thing they had cost, and the thing they had given. I lay back and looked at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular quality of stillness that is not emptiness. The stillness that arrives after a thing is genuinely over, not the false stillness of something suppressed or deferred, the real stillness of something completed, accounted for, carried without pretending it does not exist. I had loved him. He had loved me. Neither of those things was a question. I had been the only sin the country forgave him. And I had been, at the same time, and in the same rooms, and across the same 3 years of late-night calls, the one person to whom he had been real. Those two things were both true simultaneously. They did not cancel each other. They did not resolve into something simpler. They remained what they were, complicated, costly, and entirely mine. I closed my eyes. I am still here, I thought, after everything. After the woman at the door, and the folder on the table, and the 48 hours, and the walking away, and the last call, and the particular ache of a love that was real and could not be anything other than what it was. After all of it, I am still here. The woman underneath the name, the face underneath the performance, the person who was afraid she did not exist outside the category, the person who was told once, quietly, by a man who understood the feeling, I know exactly what that feels like. She exists, I exist, and the rooms we built together in the dark, the rooms where we were real before the phone records and the photographs and the Tuesday morning made them into evidence those rooms existed too. They are not nothing because they cannot be publicly acknowledged. They are not less real because the machinery documented them and reduced them to a folder delivered by two men in correct suits. They are mine. As much as anything in my life has ever been mine, truly, privately, unperformably mine. She came to my door on a Tuesday morning with two men behind her, and she said, "You have 48 hours." She was right about the 48 hours. She was wrong about what I would do with them. I used them to end something on my own terms, to choose the walking away rather than wait to be erased. To keep what was mine, the photographs, the letter, the knowledge of the rooms, the specific quality of 3 years of being known by someone who saw past the category to the person. I used them to survive myself intact. The country got to decide what it forgave. I got to decide what I kept. That is all anyone gets, in the end, what you keep, what you choose to carry, what you refuse to let be reduced to a footnote in someone else's story. I kept everything that was mine. That was enough. That is enough. I want to tell you something about what it costs to be a symbol for long enough that the symbol starts to replace you. Because this is the thing nobody talks about when they talk about people like me, not the fame, not the attention, not the mechanics of how you got there, what it costs to stay there, the specific tax that visibility levies on the person doing the being visible. The tax is this: every year, a little more of what you actually are gets converted into what you represent. The conversion is not violent. It is not dramatic. It is the slow substitution of the performed self for the original one, and it happens so gradually that you do not notice it until one day you are sitting in front of a mirror at midnight and you cannot locate yourself inside your own reflection. I had been paying that tax since I was 22 years old. He was the first person in 12 years who did not require me to pay it, who had, in fact, stopped the conversion entirely for the length of those calls, for the hours in those rooms, and given me back something that resembled the original. She came to my door and said 48 hours, and she was trying to take that back. To convert it into something else, into evidence, into a story, into a newspaper scandal, with a predictable shape and a predictable conclusion. She was trying to turn the rooms into a folder. I refused to let her. Not by fighting, not by counter-threatening, by keeping what was mine in the place where it was mine inside me, undocumented, unmanageable, beyond the reach of the folder, or the photographs, or the 48 hours, or any machinery the world could deploy against it. I loved him. He loved me. Neither of those things was ever going to be simple, and both of them were always going to be real. And the version of myself I found in those rooms, the one that existed before the performance, that had been waiting patiently underneath the constructed face, and the signature read, and the symbol she survived. She is the one telling you this. She is still here. She is still here. And she kept it all.